Asterisk, asterisk, Part 1. The Stranger in Dust Creek. Asterisk, asterisk. The stagecoach wheels groaned to a halt, sending up a cloud of red dust that seemed to hang in the air like a curtain between worlds. Clara Hastings pressed a gloved hand to her chest, steadying her breath as she peered through the window at what would be her new home. Dust Creek sprawled before her like a sun-bleached skeleton, its wooden buildings leaning against each other for support in the merciless Arizona heat. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Though Lord knows why a lady like yourself would want to stop here." Clara gathered her traveling dress and stepped down, her eastern boots meeting western soil for the first time. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and rust. And somewhere in the distance, she could hear the lowing of cattle and the sharp whistle of a cowboy calling to his horse. The main street stretched before her, flanked by the essential establishments of frontier life Murphy's General Store, the Broken Spur Saloon, a barber shop with a striped pole that had seen better days, and at the far end, the sheriff's office with its weather-beaten star nailed to the door. Men in worn chaps and dusty hats paused mid-stride to stare at her, their eyes following her progress with a mixture of curiosity and something else she couldn't quite name. "You, the new schoolmarm?" A woman's voice cut through the afternoon heat. Clara turned to find a sturdy woman in a faded calico dress, her face weathered but kind. "I'm Martha Sullivan. Run the boarding house just past the church." "Clara Hastings," she replied, grateful for a friendly face. "Yes, I've come to teach." Martha's expression shifted, a shadow of concern crossing her features. "Well, bless your heart for trying. Last teacher didn't last but 3 months. Said the children were wild as mustangs and twice as stubborn." Before Clara could respond, the sharp crack of breaking glass erupted from the saloon. A man came flying through the swinging doors, landing hard in the dust. He scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip, as another man emerged massive, with fists like ham hocks and murder in his eyes. "I told you not to show your thieving face in my establishment again. Cole!" the large man bellowed. The accused thief, Cole, was younger than Clara had first thought, perhaps late 20s, with sandy hair that caught the light and eyes the color of sage, despite the blood on his face. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with the accusation. "I didn't steal any horses. Garrett," Cole said evenly, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "You know that as well as I do." "Tell that to Mr. Barrow's missing stallion." Garrett advanced, and Clara noticed how the crowd that had gathered took a collective step back. What happened next would forever be etched in Clara's memory. Garrett pulled a knife from his boot, the blade catching the sunlight like a promise of violence. But before he could strike, Cole moved fluid as water, quick as thought. In seconds, Garrett was on the ground, the knife skittering across the dirt toward Clara's feet. Their eyes met hers wide with shock, his steady despite the chaos. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Then Garrett, humiliated and furious, lunged for the knife near Clara. Without thinking, she kicked it away, sending it spinning under the boardwalk. Garrett's hand closed on her wrist instead, yanking her forward. "Maybe I'll teach you to mind your own business, Eastern lady," he snarled, whiskey heavy on his breath. The click of a revolver being cocked cut through the air like thunder. Cole stood with his gun drawn, aimed steady at Garrett's head. "Let her go." "Now! Now!" A new voice, smooth as oil over water, interrupted the scene. Sheriff Briggs emerged from the gathering crowd, his star catching the light. He was a man in his 40s, with silver threading through his black beard and eyes as cold as a winter morning. "What seems to be the trouble here?" Garrett released Clara's wrist immediately. "This thief was in my saloon again. Sheriff, and this woman interfered with the lawful business." Briggs' gaze swept over Clara, lingering longer than propriety allowed. "Is that so, and you are?" "Clara Hastings, the new teacher." She kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Ah, yes, we heard you were coming." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "From Boston. Wasn't it you'll find we do things differently here in Dust Creek? Miss Hastings, best you learn that quickly." He turned to Cole, who still held his gun. "Put that away, Ethan. We've had enough excitement for one day." Ethan Cole holstered his weapon slowly, his eyes never leaving the sheriff's face. There was history there. Clara realized, something unspoken but heavy as stone. "As for you, Garrett," Briggs continued, "next time you want to accuse someone of theft, you bring evidence. Mr. Barrow's business is his own concern." The mention of Barrow's name rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown in still water. Clara filed that reaction away for later consideration. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan approached her, up close. She could see the weariness in his eyes, the kind that came from carrying burdens too heavy for one man alone. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "Garrett's mean as a rattlesnake when he's drunk, and he's drunk most of the time." "I couldn't just stand there," Clara replied, surprising herself with her own firmness. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, I don't suppose you could. Eastern ladies and their principles." He touched the brim of his hat. "Name's Ethan Cole. I work cattle at the Henderson spread. When I'm not being accused of crimes I didn't commit. Clara Hastings, and I'm from Philadelphia, not Boston." "My apologies, Miss Philadelphia." This time the smile reached his eyes. "Might I suggest you get yourself to Mrs. Sullivan's before dark? These streets aren't kind to strangers after sunset." As if to emphasize his point, a coyote howled in the distance, its cry echoing off the red rocks that surrounded the town. Clara shivered despite the heat. "I'll keep that in mind. Mr. Cole, thank you for intervening." He was already walking away, his spurs jingling a lonely rhythm. "Wasn't for you I drew my gun, ma'am. Just don't like unfair fights." But the way he glanced back at her suggested otherwise. Martha Sullivan appeared at Clara's elbow, her expression worried. "Come along, dear. Let's get you settled before the menfolk start lining up to court you. Word's already spreading, the wild teacher is a stranger in town, desired by all. Lord help us. You've stirred up more excitement in 5 minutes than we've had in months." As Clara followed Martha toward the boarding house, she caught sight of Sheriff Briggs watching from his office doorway. Beside him stood a man she hadn't noticed before, tall, impeccably dressed despite the dust, with the kind of smooth handsomeness that masked something harder underneath. He whispered something to Briggs, and both men laughed. "Who is that?" Clara asked. Martha followed her gaze and her face tightened. "Lucian Barrow. Owns the silver mine and half the businesses in town. Some say he owns the sheriff too, but I wouldn't repeat that if I were you." The boarding house was a modest 2-story affair, with lace curtains that seemed almost defiant in their delicacy against the harsh landscape. Martha showed Clara to a small but clean room overlooking the main street. "Dinner's at 6, Martha said. "And Miss Hastings, a word of advice. Ethan Cole is a good man, despite what some say, but he's got ghosts. And in this town, ghosts have a way of coming back to haunt the living. You'd do well to keep your distance." After Martha left, Clara unpacked her few belongings, placing her mother's Bible on the nightstand and hanging her 3 dresses in the wardrobe. From her window, she could see the whole of Dust Creek's main street. Cowboys were driving a small herd of cattle through town, their shouts mixing with the piano music drifting from the saloon. A group of children played in the dust, their laughter bright as silver coins. This was to be her new life. These wild, suspicious people would be her neighbors. Those unruly children would be her students. And somewhere out there, Ethan Cole was probably tending to his split lip and trying to forget the Eastern woman who'd kicked away Garrett's knife. Clara touched the bruises already forming on her wrist where Garrett had grabbed her. She'd left Philadelphia to escape the ghosts of cholera victims, her parents among them, only to find herself in a town that Martha claimed was full of them. As the sun began its descent behind the red rocks, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara made a decision. She hadn't traveled 2,000 miles to cower in a boarding house room. Tomorrow, she would find the schoolhouse, assess what needed to be done, and begin the work she'd come here to do. But tonight, as darkness crept across the desert and the saloon's music grew louder, she allowed herself one moment of uncertainty. Through her window, she caught sight of a lone rider on the outskirts of town, silhouetted against the dying light. Even from this distance, she recognized the way he sat his horse. Ethan Cole paused at the top of the ridge, and for just a moment, Clara could have sworn he looked back toward the boarding house. Then he spurred his horse forward and disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving nothing but dust and questions in his wake. Somewhere in the distance, that coyote howled again, and Clara closed her curtains against the night. She'd wanted a new beginning. It seemed Dust Creek was prepared to give her more than she'd bargained for. The wild teacher was indeed a stranger in town, and already the dust was settling into the folds of her eastern dress, claiming her bit by bit for the desert. What she didn't know yet was that by morning, everyone in Dust Creek would be talking about the Philadelphia woman who'd stood up to Garrett and caught the eye of both the sheriff and the mysterious Ethan Cole. The game was set. The players were in position, and somewhere in the darkness, Lucian Barrows smiled and poured himself another whiskey, already planning his next move. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 2. The fire beneath the town. Asterisk, asterisk. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dust Creek as Clara made her way to the abandoned building that would serve as the schoolhouse. She'd risen before dawn, unable to sleep with the mixture of excitement and apprehension churning in her stomach. The town was different in the early light, quieter, almost peaceful, with only the occasional crow breaking the silence. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a weathered structure that had once been a storage shed for the old trading post. Its walls leaned slightly, as if tired from standing against the desert winds, and the door hung crooked on rusty hinges. Clara pushed it open, wincing at the protesting squeal. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the walls. A few broken benches lay scattered about, and in one corner, a family of mice had made their home in what remained of some old textbooks. "Not exactly Harvard," a familiar voice said from the doorway. Clara turned to find Ethan Cole leaning against the frame, his hat pushed back and a wry smile on his face. The morning light caught the bruise on his jaw from yesterday's altercation, painting it purple and yellow. "Mr. Cole," she said, brushing dust from her hands. "You're up early." "Cattle don't much care for sleeping in." He stepped inside, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Heard you were planning to fix this place up. Thought you might need some help." "That's kind of you, but nothing. Can't have the children learning in a building that might fall down around their ears." He surveyed the room with a practiced eye. "I've got some spare lumber at the Henderson place. Boss won't mind if I borrow it, long as I replace it come payday." Before Clara could protest further, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Sheriff Briggs appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 deputies. His cold eyes swept over them, lingering on how close they stood to each other. "Miss Hastings, Cole." He touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Mighty cozy scene for so early in the morning." "I was offering to help repair the schoolhouse." "Sheriff," Ethan said evenly, "unless there's a law against charity in Dust Creek now." Briggs' jaw tightened. "Just making my morning rounds. We had some trouble last night. 3 horses went missing from Barrow's stable. And naturally, you thought to find them in a broken-down schoolhouse." Clara's voice carried more bite than she'd intended. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "I think wherever Cole is, trouble follows. Man's got a reputation." Based on what evidence? Clara stepped forward, surprising herself with her boldness. Has Mr. Cole ever been convicted of theft? Not yet, Briggs said slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. But there's a first time for everything. You do well to remember that. Miss Hastings, this ain't Philadelphia. Out here, we don't need judges and juries to know when a man's gone bad. After the sheriff left, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. You shouldn't defend me to him. It'll only bring you trouble. Someone should stand up to him, Clara replied, returning to her survey of the room. This town seems to run on fear and suspicion. Welcome to the frontier. Ethan picked up a broken bench, testing its weight. Though I appreciate the gesture, you don't know what you're stepping into. Briggs has held a grudge against the Lakota ever since his family was killed in what he calls a raid 5 years back. Anyone who shows sympathy to them or questions his version of justice becomes an enemy. And you've shown sympathy. Ethan's face darkened. I've done more than that, but that's a story for another day. They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, Ethan hauling out broken furniture while Clara swept and cleaned. Around mid-morning, the first curious faces appeared at the door children, ranging from about 6 to 14, peering in with wide eyes. Is it true? A girl with pigtails asked. Are you really going to teach us to read? Clara smiled. That's the plan. What's your name? Lucy Morrison. Ma'am, my PA says women can't teach nothing useful, but my ma said I should come look anyway. More children crowded in behind Lucy the Murphy twins with their shock of red hair. Young Tom Henderson, whose father owned the ranch where Ethan worked, a quiet Lakota boy who hung back from the others, and several more whose names Clara would soon learn. When can we start? Tom asked eagerly. I want to learn to read like my cousin in Denver. Give me a few days to fix up the space. Clara said, then we'll begin. The Lakota boy stepped forward hesitantly. Will I be allowed? His English was careful, precise. Before Clara could answer, one of the older boys shoved him. Nobody wants you here. Joseph, go back to your teepee. That's enough, Clara's voice cracked like a whip. In my classroom, everyone is equal. Anyone who can't accept that is free to leave. The children stared at her in shock. Even Ethan looked surprised. My ma says Indians are dangerous, Lucy whispered. Have you ever been hurt by Joseph? Clara asked gently. Lucy shook her head. Then perhaps we should judge people by their actions, not by what others tell us about them. She turned to Joseph. You're welcome here. All of you are. After the children left, buzzing with excitement and speculation, Ethan shook his head. You just made yourself some enemies. The town barely tolerates the few Lakota who work at the mine, teaching their children alongside white kids. That's asking for trouble. Then trouble is what I'll get, Clara said firmly. I didn't come here to perpetuate ignorance and hatred. Ethan studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected from an Eastern schoolmarm. And what did you expect? Someone softer, easier to scare off. He headed for the door. I'll be back tomorrow with that lumber. Try not to start any revolutions before then. But Clara's revolution had already begun. By afternoon, word had spread through Dust Creek like wildfire. The new teacher was planning to mix white and Indian children in her classroom. Some called it progressive. Others called it dangerous. Most called it scandalous. At the boarding house that evening, Clara faced her first real opposition. 3 women sat in Martha's parlor, their faces pinched with disapproval. Miss Hastings, began Mrs. Morrison, Lucy's mother, Clara realized. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but perhaps you don't understand our situation here. Enlighten me, Clara said coolly. The Indians are not like us, said another woman, Mrs. Campbell. They're savage, unpredictable. Just last year, a war party attacked a settlement not 50 miles from here. And how many Indian villages have been attacked by white settlers? Clara asked. How many of their children have been taken to boarding schools far from home? The women exchanged glances. You're young. Mrs. Morrison said. Idealistic, but this is about protecting our children. From what? From learning that people different from themselves are still human. Mrs. Campbell stood abruptly. I won't have my children corrupted by Eastern liberal ideas. If you insist on this integrated classroom, many of us will keep our children home. Then they'll remain ignorant, Clara said bluntly. And that's a choice you'll have to live with. After they left, Martha sank into a chair. Child, you've stirred up a hornet's nest. Half the town's talking about the beautiful new teacher who's got every unmarried man twisted in knots. The other half's talking about your radical ideas. Let them talk, Clara said, though her hands trembled slightly. I won't compromise on this. That night, a rock sailed through Clara's window, wrapped in a note. Indian lovers aren't welcome in Dust Creek. The next morning, Ethan arrived with a wagon full of lumber to find Clara sweeping up broken glass. His face darkened as she explained what had happened. This is what I meant, he said quietly. This town doesn't take kindly to change. Then it's time they learned. Clara dumped the glass shards outside. Will you still help me, knowing it might damage your reputation further? Ethan was quiet for a moment, then began unloading lumber. My reputation's already shot to hell. Might as well go down for something worthwhile. As they worked to repair the schoolhouse, other unexpected allies appeared. The Lakota boy, Joseph, arrived with his older sister, who silently began helping Clara clean. Tom Henderson brought his younger siblings. Even Lucy Morrison snuck away from home to help, though she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting her mother to appear. But for every ally, there seemed to be two enemies. Sheriff Briggs made a point of riding past the schoolhouse several times a day, his cold stare a constant reminder of his disapproval. Garrett made drunken threats at the saloon, and Lucian Barrow himself paid Clara a visit on her third day of repairs. He was everything Martha had warned about: smooth, charming, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his calculating eyes. Miss Hastings, he said, removing an expensive hat. I've heard so much about you, the beautiful teacher causing quite a stir. Mr. Barrow, Clara acknowledged coolly. I admire your passion, he continued, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. But perhaps you don't fully understand the delicate balance we maintain here. The Indians work in my mind because they're useful, but mixing them with our children, treating them as equals, that upsets the natural order. And what exactly is natural about your order, Mr. Barrow? His smile sharpened. The order that keeps this town prosperous, that keeps people employed, that maintains peace. He stepped closer, and Clara caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker. I could be a powerful friend, Miss Hastings, or a formidable enemy. The choice is yours. I've made my choice, Clara said steadily. Good day, Mr. Barrow. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. Indeed you have. Remember that when things become difficult. That evening, as Clara and Ethan put the finishing touches on a newly repaired wall, she told him about Barrow's visit. Ethan's hand stilled on the hammer. He threatened you. Not in so many words, but the intent was clear. Ethan turned to face her, and in the fading light, she could see the conflict in his eyes. Clara, Miss Hastings, you need to understand something. Barrow owns this town, the mine, the bank, half the businesses. When he wants someone gone, they disappear. Sometimes they leave town. Sometimes, he trailed off. Sometimes what? Sometimes they have accidents. Mining accidents, riding accidents. The kind that don't get investigated too closely. Clara felt a chill despite the warm evening air. Are you trying to scare me off too? I'm trying to protect you. The words came out rougher than he'd intended. You're the first good thing to happen to this town in years. I don't want to see you hurt." Their eyes met and held, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Then, from somewhere in town, a woman's scream shattered the moment. They ran toward the sound, joined by others drawn by the commotion. In the main street, a crowd had gathered. Sheriff Briggs stood in the center, a rope in his hands. At his feet knelt a young Lakota man, hands bound, blood running from a cut on his head. "Caught him red-handed," Briggs announced, "stealing from Garrett's saloon." "That's a lie." The young man's voice was desperate. "I was nowhere near—" Briggs backhanded him casually. "Indians and thieves. Sometimes I can't tell the difference." The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Clara pushed forward. "You can't just—" Ethan caught her arm. "Don't," he whispered urgently. "Not here, not now." But Clara wrenched free. "Sheriff Briggs, this man deserves a trial. You can't just—" "Can't what?" Briggs' cold eyes fixed on her. "Can't maintain order, can't protect decent folks from thievery. You have no proof. I have all the proof I need." He gestured to one of his deputies. "String him up." "No!" Clara lunged forward, but strong hands held her back. Not Ethan's. He had moved toward the prisoner, but two townsmen who grabbed her arms. What happened next would haunt Clara's dreams. The young Lakota man was dragged to a tree at the edge of town. The crowd followed, some eager, others reluctant but too afraid to protest. Clara fought against the hands holding her, screaming for them to stop, calling them murderers, barbarians. Ethan tried to intervene, but Briggs's deputies held guns on him. "You want to join him? Cole." The young man died bravely, calling out something in his own language that made Joseph, watching from the shadows, sob into his sister's shoulder. When it was over, the crowd dispersed quickly, as if ashamed. Clara stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Ethan approached slowly, his own face etched with rage and grief. "This is what I was trying to tell you," he said quietly. "This is Dust Creek. This is what we are." "No," Clara said fiercely. "This is what you've allowed yourselves to become, but it doesn't have to stay this way." She turned and walked back toward the boarding house, each step heavy with determination. Behind her, Ethan watched her go, something like hope flickering in his chest for the first time in years. At her window that night, Clara stared out at the tree where a young man had died for the crime of being different. Tomorrow, she would open her school. She would teach any child who came white, Indian, Mexican, or mixed blood. She would teach them to read, to write, to think. And maybe, just maybe, she would teach them to be better than their parents. The wild teacher was no longer just a stranger desired by all. She had become something far more dangerous, a catalyst for change in a town that had forgotten how to hope for anything better than survival. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 3. Desert Winds and Buried Secrets. Asterisk, asterisk. The sandstorm hit Dust Creek without warning on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Clara had opened her school. The sky turned an ominous yellow-brown, and the wind howled like a living thing, driving sand through every crack and crevice. Clara hurried to close the schoolhouse windows, but the sand found its way in anyway, coating everything in a fine layer of grit. "Everyone under the desks," she called to her students, all 12 of them who had braved their parents' disapproval to attend. Joseph and his sister Sarah huddled together, while Tom Henderson pulled Lucy Morrison under the sturdiest desk. The building groaned and shuddered. Through the chaos, Clara heard the door bang open. Ethan Cole stumbled in, his face covered by a bandana, leading a string of children he'd found caught in the storm. "Get away from the windows!" he shouted over the wind's roar. A moment later, the glass shattered inward, sending shards across the room. For 2 hours they waited. Clara telling stories to keep the children calm, while Ethan reinforced the walls that seemed ready to give way. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to find Dust Creek transformed. Sand drifts reached halfway up some buildings. The old cottonwood tree in the town square had been uprooted. "Is everyone accounted for?" Clara asked, doing a quick head count. "My little brother," one of the children cried. "He was playing by the old well." Without hesitation, Ethan headed back into the swirling dust. Clara followed. Ignoring his shouts for her to stay back, they found the boy half buried near the abandoned well, unconscious but breathing. Together they carried him to Dr. Morrison's house, Lucy's father, who, despite his disapproval of Clara's teaching methods, couldn't refuse to treat a child. That evening, as they sat on the schoolhouse steps cleaning sand from their clothes, Ethan studied Clara with something like wonder. "You could have stayed inside," he said. "Let me handle it. We're partners in this, aren't we?" Clara pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, dampening it with water from her canteen to wipe the dust from a cut on his cheek. "Building the school, protecting the children." He caught her wrist gently, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Clara, you need to know something about me. About why Briggs hates me. About why half this town thinks I'm a thief and worse." She waited, her hand still in his. "My father worked in Barrow's mine," Ethan began, his voice low. "He was a good man. Honest, too honest, maybe. He discovered that Barrow was skimming wages, charging the miners for tools and supplies at triple the cost, keeping them in debt so they couldn't leave. When he threatened to go to the territorial authorities, there was an accident." Clara's fingers tightened on his. "What kind of accident?" "Cave-in. Only it happened in a section that had been declared stable the day before. And the only men who died were my father and two others who'd been talking about organizing the workers." His laugh was bitter. "I was 15, old enough to know it was murder, too young and scared to do anything about it." "That's why you stay," Clara said softly. "Not because you can't leave, but because you're waiting for justice." "Justice," Ethan shook his head. "I gave up on justice years ago. Now I just try to, balance the scales a little. Help where I can. Stop Briggs from hanging every Indian he finds convenient to blame." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. The storm had scoured the air clean, and the stars began to appear, brilliant in the clear sky. "I should go," Ethan said finally, though he made no move to leave. "People will talk if they see us together after dark." "Let them talk," Clara replied, unconsciously echoing her words from weeks before. But she knew he was right. In a town like Dust Creek, reputation was currency, and hers was already depleted. The next day brought a different kind of storm. Clara arrived at the schoolhouse to find Sheriff Briggs waiting, along with Lucian Barrow and several members of what passed for the town council. "Miss Hastings," Barrow said smoothly, "we need to discuss the future of your educational experiment." "My students are making excellent progress," Clara said, unlocking the door. "Joseph can already read simple sentences, and Lucy is showing a real aptitude for arithmetic." "That's precisely the problem," one of the council members said. "You're filling their heads with ideas above their station, especially the Indian children." Briggs leaned against the doorframe, his hand resting on his pistol as always. "There've been complaints, disruption of the social order, talk of equality and rights. That kind of thinking leads to trouble." "That kind of thinking leads to progress," Clara countered. Barrow's smile was sharp as a blade. "Progress, an interesting word. Tell me, Miss Hastings, in your quest for progress, have you been spending time in the old courthouse? The abandoned one on the edge of town?" Clara kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart began to race. She had indeed been there, searching through old records for information about the town's history, trying to understand the roots of its prejudices. "I've been looking for additional books for the school," she said truthfully. if incompletely. "Funny thing about that old building," Briggs said. "Lot of records stored there, some dating back to the early days of the territory, some that might be misinterpreted by someone who didn't understand the full context." Clara met his cold stare steadily. "I find context is often a matter of perspective. Sheriff." The men exchanged glances. Barrow stepped closer, and Clara could smell tobacco and pomade. "Let me be clearer. Miss Hastings, your presence here has been tolerated, because some find you ornamental. But if you continue to disrupt our community, if you continue to dig where you shouldn't—" He let the threat hang in the air. After they left, Clara's hands shook as she prepared for her students. She had found something in those old records documents that didn't match the official story of the Indian raid that had killed Briggs's family. References to a man named McCready, who'd been on Barrow's payroll. Payment records that coincided with the date of the attack. Joseph was the first student to arrive. As always, his English had improved dramatically, and with it came questions Clara found increasingly difficult to deflect. "Miss Clara," he said that morning, "my grandfather tells stories about the day the sheriff's family died. He says it wasn't our people who did it." Clara chose her words carefully. "What does he say happened?" "Men with painted faces, but the paint washed off in the rain. White men pretending." Joseph's dark eyes were too old for his young face. "Grandfather says the sheriff knows this, but chooses to hate us anyway. It's easier than hating the truth." As the other students filed in, Clara made a decision. After class, she would go back to the courthouse. She would find the proof she needed. And then she would decide what to do with it. The day's lessons passed in a blur. Clara taught multiplication to the older children while the younger ones practiced their letters. She helped Sarah with her English pronunciation and showed Tom how to diagram sentences. Normal activities that felt surreal given the weight of secrets pressing down on her. As the children left for the day, Ethan appeared in the doorway. His face was grim. "Don't go to the courthouse tonight," he said without preamble. Clara stiffened. "Have you been following me?" "Watching out for you. There's a difference." He entered the room, closing the door behind him. "Clara, I know what you're looking for. I've known about those documents for years." "Then why haven't you—" "Because knowing and proving are two different things. And because the last person who tried to use that information ended up at the bottom of Mesquite Canyon with a broken neck." He took her hands, his urgency palpable. "Please, let this go." "I can't," Clara said. "Not when children are being taught to hate. Not when innocent people are being hanged for crimes they didn't commit. Not when you're falling in love with this place despite everything." Ethan's voice was soft. "Or is it something else you're falling for?" The air between them crackled with tension. Clara found herself swaying toward him, drawn by something stronger than reason. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a smudge of chalk dust. "This is dangerous," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant their growing closeness or her investigation. "Everything worth doing is," he replied. The kiss, when it came, was gentle a question more than a statement. Clara answered by pressing closer, her hands gripping his shirt. For a moment, the weight of secrets and threats fell away, leaving only the two of them in a shaft of late afternoon sunlight. A gunshot shattered the moment. They broke apart, rushing to the window. In the street, a crowd was gathering. Someone shouted for the doctor. "Stay here," Ethan commanded, heading for the door. But Clara had never been good at following orders. She followed him into the street, where they found chaos. One of Barrow's men lay in the dust, blood pooling beneath him. Standing over him, gun still smoking, was an old Lakota man, Joseph's grandfather. "He killed my grandson," the old man said, his voice carrying across the shocked silence. 3 weeks ago, the boy you hanged, Sheriff, this man bragged about planting the stolen goods in his pocket. Briggs pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. Without a word, he drew his gun and shot the old man. "No!" Clara's scream joined others as Joseph broke free from the crowd, falling to his knees beside his grandfather. The dying man pressed something into Joseph's hand, a small leather pouch. His lips moved, words in Lakota that Joseph would later tell Clara meant truth lives longer than lies. As the crowd dispersed, leaving two bodies in the street, Clara felt something harden inside her. That night, despite Ethan's protests, she returned to the courthouse. By lamplight, she carefully copied the most damning documents, receipts, correspondence, records that painted a picture of conspiracy and murder. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Well, Garrett's voice slurred with whiskey. The pretty teacher, all alone. Clara's hand went to the small pistol Ethan had insisted she carry, but Garrett was faster, knocking it from her grip. "You've been nothing but trouble since you arrived," he growled, advancing on her. "Maybe it's time someone taught you a lesson about minding your own business." Clara grabbed the lamp, ready to throw it, when another figure appeared in the doorway. "Touch her and die," Ethan said quietly, his gun trained on Garrett. Garrett laughed. "You won't shoot me, Cole. You're too much of a coward, just like your daddy." The words had barely left his mouth when Ethan's fist connected with his jaw. Garrett went down hard, out cold before he hit the floor. "We need to leave," Ethan said, helping Clara gather the papers. "Now, before someone comes looking for him." As they slipped out into the night, papers clutched to Clara's chest. She realized they had crossed a line. There was no going back now. The truth was out there, waiting to be revealed. But truth, Clara was learning, could be the most dangerous thing of all in a town built on lies. They made it back to the boarding house without incident, but Clara knew their time was running out. Through her window, she could see lights moving in the sheriff's office. Plans were being made. Retaliation was coming. "What do we do now?" she asked Ethan, who had refused to leave her alone. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Now we prepare for war, because that's what you've started, whether you meant to or not." Clara thought of Joseph's grandfather, dying in the street for speaking truth, of the young man hanged 3 weeks ago, of all the injustices yet to come if things didn't change. "Then war it is," she said quietly, steel in her voice. "And this time, the right side is going to win." Outside, a coyote howled, and the desert wind whispered secrets through the cracks in the walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, Clara Hastings' teacher, troublemaker, and unlikely revolutionary held the truth in her hands. And sometimes, truth was the most powerful weapon of all. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 4, Light and Shadow asterisk, asterisk. The news that Clara possessed damning documents spread through Dust Creek like wildfire, though no one could say exactly how the word got out. Perhaps it was the way Garrett stumbled out of the courthouse the next morning, sporting a black eye and muttering about that meddling schoolmarm. Or maybe it was the unusual activity around the sheriff's office, with riders coming and going at all hours. Clara felt the change immediately. Parents who had grudgingly allowed their children to attend school now kept them home. Her walk to the schoolhouse, once merely uncomfortable, became a gauntlet of hostile stares and whispered threats. Only Joseph, Sarah, and Tom Henderson continued to show up for lessons. "You should leave town," Sarah said quietly one afternoon, her English much improved. "My uncle says bad things are coming." Clara looked at her 3 remaining students, their faces grave beyond their years. "Would you have me abandon you?" "Better that than—" Joseph didn't finish, but they all knew what he meant. The tree where his friend had died still bore the rope marks. That evening, Martha Sullivan knocked on Clara's door with worry etched deep in her weathered face. "There's talk at the saloon," she said. "Barrows offered a reward for those papers." Some are saying they'll burn the schoolhouse with you in it if that's what it takes. Clara's hands trembled as she poured tea, but her voice remained steady. Let them try. I won't be driven out by cowards and murderers. Brave words won't stop bullets. Child! Martha gripped her hands. At least give the papers to someone else. The territorial marshal. Perhaps. The marshal is a 3-day ride away, assuming he'd even listen to a woman's accusations against the town's most powerful man. Clara shook her head. No, this needs to be handled here, by the people who've suffered under Barrow's rule. A soft knock interrupted them. Clara opened the door to find Ethan, his face grim beneath the shadow of his hat. Pack your things, he said without preamble. I'm getting you out of here tonight. I'm not leaving. Clara, please. The desperation in his voice made her heart ache. They've hired McCready. He rode in an hour ago. The name sent ice through her veins. McCready, the man mentioned in the documents. Barrow's enforcer, suspected in dozens of deaths across the territory. All the more reason to act quickly, Clara said, though her mouth had gone dry. If we could get the truth to the right people. There are no right people. Ethan's control snapped. Don't you understand? Barrow owns the judges, the lawmen, everyone who matters. The only court that matters here is the one enforced by guns. Martha quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. In the lamplight, Clara could see the fear in Ethan's eyes, not for himself, but for her. Then we make our own court, she said softly. The court of public opinion. Even Barrow can't control everyone. There are good people in this town, people who are tired of living in fear. Good people who will stand by and watch you die rather than risk their own necks. Ethan pulled her close, his hands framing her face. Clara, I've lost everyone I've ever cared about to this town's violence. I won't lose you too. The raw emotion in his voice broke through her defenses. She pressed her forehead to his, breathing in the scent of leather and sage that always clung to him. You won't lose me, she whispered. But I can't run. Not when we're so close to. The window exploded in a shower of glass. Clara felt Ethan's arms around her, pulling her to the floor as another shot splintered the doorframe. Stay down. He drew his gun, returning fire through the broken window. Can you get to your room? Clara nodded, crawling across the floor as bullets whined overhead. Her hands found the leather satchel containing the documents, clutching it to her chest. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. In the ringing silence, they heard Martha's voice from downstairs. The sheriff's coming. But it wasn't salvation, Clara knew that. Briggs would find some reason to arrest them, and once in his jail, they'd never make it to trial. The back stairs, Ethan said urgently. My horse is in the alley. They slipped out as boots thundered up the front staircase. The night air was cold on Clara's face as Ethan lifted her onto his horse, swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and despite the danger, she felt oddly safe. Where are we going? She asked as they walked the horse quietly through the shadows. The old Velasquez place. It's been abandoned for years, about 5 miles into the desert. We can hide there until... Until what? Until they get tired of looking. Clara twisted to look at him. This doesn't end until one side loses. Ethan, you know that. He didn't answer, spurring the horse into a gallop as shouts erupted behind them. The moon was new, leaving only starlight to guide them across the rough terrain. Clara pressed herself against Ethan's chest, trusting him to navigate the treacherous paths. They were perhaps 2 miles from town when the storm hit not sand this time, but rain, sudden and violent as only desert storms could be. Within moments, they were soaked, the horse struggling through rapidly forming mud. There, Ethan pointed to a dark shape against the cliffs. The old cabin. It was more shack than cabin. Really a 2-room structure built into the hillside by some long-forgotten prospector. But it was shelter, and that was all that mattered. Ethan saw to the horse while Clara explored their refuge by feel. She found a lantern and matches wrapped in oilcloth, bringing blessed light to the darkness. The main room held a rough table, 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace. The back room had a narrow bed with a straw mattress that had seen better days. "We can't stay long," Ethan said, entering and shaking water from his hat. "They'll search every abandoned building within 10 miles come daylight." Clara was shivering, her dress clinging to her like a second skin. Ethan noticed and immediately began building a fire, his movements quick and efficient. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, not meeting her eyes. "There are some old blankets in the chest." Clara found the blankets musty but dry. She hesitated, acutely aware of the impropriety. Then practicality won out. She couldn't afford to catch pneumonia. When she emerged wrapped in rough wool, she found Ethan standing by the window, keeping watch. He'd removed his wet shirt, and the firelight played across the scars on his back, old wounds she hadn't known about. "Barrow?" she asked softly. He nodded without turning. "After my father died, I was young, angry, stupid enough to call him a murderer to his face. He had his men teach me a lesson about respect." Clara crossed to him, her fingers ghosting over the raised marks. "I'm sorry." He caught her hand, turning to face her. "Don't be." "Those scars reminded me every day why I stayed in Dust Creek. I was just waiting for the right moment." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Or maybe I was waiting for the right person." The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, the world had shrunk to just the 2 of them. Clara was acutely aware of every point of contact, his hand holding hers, the heat radiating from his bare chest, the way his eyes had darkened to the color of midnight sage. "Ethan," she breathed, and it was all the invitation he needed. The kiss was different from their first, desperate, hungry, full of the knowledge that tomorrow might never come. Clara's fingers tangled in his still damp hair as he backed her against the wall, his hands spanning her waist through the thin blanket. "Tell me to stop," he said against her lips, even as his mouth traced a path down her throat. "Tell me this is wrong." "Everything about us is wrong," Clara gasped. "A proper Eastern lady and a suspected horse thief. We're a scandal waiting to happen." He pulled back to look at her, one hand coming up to trace her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. "Is that what you want, propriety, safety?" "I want you," she said simply. "I want whatever time we have, however long that is." They made love by firelight while the storm battered the cabin walls, finding in each other a refuge from the violence and hatred waiting outside. Clara discovered that beneath his rough exterior, Ethan was surprisingly gentle, treating her like something precious and breakable, even as passion consumed them both. Afterward, they lay entwined on the narrow bed, listening to the rain begin to slacken. Clara traced lazy patterns on Ethan's chest, feeling more content than she had any right to be given their circumstances. "When this is over," Ethan said quietly, "would you consider staying not in Dust Creek somewhere else? California, maybe, or Oregon, somewhere we could start fresh." Clara rose on one elbow to look at him. "When this is over, you mean if we survive?" "We'll survive." His arms tightened around her. "I won't let them hurt you. Clara, whatever it takes." And the children, the people still suffering under Barrow's rule. "Someone else can fight that battle. I've given this town enough." His voice turned bitter. "My father, my childhood, years of my life, I won't give it you too." Clara was quiet for a long moment, understanding his pain but knowing she couldn't abandon her purpose. "The documents." "Forget the documents. Let Barrow have his empire of dust and blood. We'll build something better, somewhere else." But even as Clara let him pull her close again, she knew it wasn't that simple. The papers hidden in her satchel represented more than just evidence. They were justice for Joseph's grandfather, for Ethan's father, for all the nameless victims of Barrow's greed. The storm passed near dawn, leaving the desert washed clean and sparkling. Ethan rose first, dressing quickly and checking outside for signs of pursuit. "We need to move," he said. "They'll be—" The sound of approaching horses cut him off. Many horses, moving fast. Clara scrambled for her still damp dress, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see dust rising in the distance. "How did they find us so quickly?" she asked, though she suspected the answer. In a town where Barrow had eyes everywhere, someone had probably seen them leave. "It doesn't matter." Ethan checked his gun, his face grim. "There's a back way out, through the old mine shaft. It comes out near Devil's Canyon. From there—" "No." Clara finished fastening her dress and picked up the satchel. "No more running. This ends now." "Clara, there are at least a dozen men out there. We can't—" "We can't keep running forever either." She met his desperate gaze steadily. "I won't live my life looking over my shoulder, and neither should you. It's time to face this." The riders were close enough now to make out individual figures. Briggs led them, with McCready at his side, a lean, dangerous-looking man with dead eyes. Barrow himself brought up the rear, pristine even after a night of searching. "Clara Hastings," Briggs' voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Come out with those papers, and we might let your cowboy live." Ethan moved to the door, but Clara caught his arm. "Together," she said. "Whatever happens, we face it together." He kissed her hard, pouring all his fear and love and desperation into it. "Together," he agreed. They stepped out into the morning light, Ethan's gun drawn but not raised, Clara clutching the satchel that had caused so much trouble. "Well, well," Barrow said, riding forward, the teacher and the thief. How poetic, his cold eyes fixed on Clara. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience. Miss Hastings, I trust you'll hand over my property now." "These documents aren't your property," Clara said clearly. "They're evidence of murder, conspiracy, and theft. Evidence that you paid McCready to slaughter innocent people and frame the Lakota for it. Evidence that you've been stealing from your workers and killing anyone who opposed you." The men shifted uneasily. Even some of Barrow's hired guns looked uncomfortable. "Lies," Barrow said smoothly. "The ravings of a hysterical woman influenced by a known criminal." "Then you won't mind if we take these papers to the territorial marshal for verification." Barrow's smile was thin as a blade. "I'm afraid you won't be going anywhere. Miss Hastings, you see, fugitives who resist arrest sometimes meet with unfortunate accidents." "Like my father did," Ethan spoke for the first time, his voice deadly quiet. "Your father was a troublemaker, just like you." Barrow's mask finally slipped, revealing the cruel satisfaction beneath. "Yes, I had him killed, just like I had those Indians killed to frame their tribe. Just like I'm going to kill you both now, and anyone else who threatens what I've built." "Did you hear that, boys?" A new voice spoke from the rocks above. Judge Wells, the one honest lawman in 3 counties, stepped into view with a rifle trained on Barrow. "That sounded like a confession to me." More men appeared, not Barrow's hired guns, but townspeople, Tom Henderson's father, Dr. Morrison, even some of the miners who worked for Barrow, their faces hard with the years of suppressed rage. "You brought a posse?" Barrow's voice rose in disbelief. "Miss Hastings sent word before she left town," Judge Wells said, "along with copies of certain very interesting documents. Seems folks are tired of living under your boot. Barrow." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Then McCready went for his gun. Several things happened at once. Ethan shoved Clara behind the water trough as bullets filled the air. Judge Wells's men opened fire from the rocks. Briggs, faced with overwhelming odds and his employer's confession, threw down his badge and raised his hands. The gunfight was brief but vicious. When the smoke cleared, McCready lay dead in the dust. Several of Barrow's men were wounded or surrendering, and Barrow himself sat on his horse, clutching a bleeding shoulder, his empire crumbling around him. It's over, Barrow. Judge Wells said, "You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges I'll think of on the way to trial." As the judge's men took Barrow and his surviving hired guns into custody, Clara emerged from behind the trough to find Ethan checking himself for wounds. "How?" he asked. "How did you get word to the judge?" Clara smiled, exhaustion and relief making her almost giddy. "I gave Joseph's sister Sarah a copy of the documents yesterday. Told her to ride for the judge if anything happened to me. I had a feeling we wouldn't make it through the night without trouble." Ethan stared at her, then laughed the first genuine, joyful sound she'd heard from him. "You wonderful, devious, brilliant woman." He pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw. "Remind me never to play poker with you." "I'll consider it," Clara said, melting into his embrace. "Though I think we have more important things to discuss. Something about California." "Or Oregon," Ethan agreed, pressing his forehead to hers. "Somewhere nobody cares about our scandalous past. Somewhere you can teach without death threats. Somewhere we can be just Clara and Ethan, not the wild teacher and the suspected horse thief." "That sounds wonderful." Clara said, "But first, I have students waiting. Joseph and Sarah and Tom deserve to finish their school year. Don't you think?" Ethan groaned but smiled. "Of course you do. Fine, we'll stay until summer. But then we'll see where the wind takes us," Clara finished, together. As they rode back to Dust Creek with Judge Wells and his posse, Clara reflected on how much had changed since she'd stepped off that stagecoach. She'd come west to escape her past, only to find herself fighting for the future, not just her own, but an entire town's. The wild teacher was a stranger no more. She'd been tested by desert storms and human cruelty, and she'd emerged stronger for it. And somehow, in the midst of chaos and violence, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. She'd found home, not in a place, but in the man riding beside her, his hand reaching over to squeeze hers in silent promise. Whatever came next, they would face it as they'd learned to face everything together, with courage and with hope for a better tomorrow. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 5. When Truth Comes to Light, asterisk, asterisk. The journey back to Dust Creek with Judge Wells should have felt like a triumph, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. Barrow rode ahead in chains, his shoulder roughly bandaged, but his eyes held a calculating gleam that made her nervous. Men like him didn't accept defeat easily. Her fears proved justified when they were still 3 miles from town. A cloud of dust on the horizon resolved into riders, at least 20 men, all armed, led by a figure Clara recognized with a sinking heart. "That's Barrow's foreman, Jake Sullivan," Ethan said quietly, his hand moving to his gun. "No relation to Martha. Thank God, he's been managing the mine in Barrow's absence." Judge Wells raised his hand, calling a halt. "Gentlemen," he called out as Sullivan's group approached, "I hope you're here to welcome us back peacefully." Sullivan, a thick-set man with scarred hands and cold eyes, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "We're here for our employer. Judge, the mine needs him. The whole town needs him. You can't just ride in here and destroy everything we've built." "What you've built on blood and lies," Clara said before she could stop herself. Sullivan's gaze fixed on her with naked hostility. "The schoolmarm should have known a woman was behind this trouble." He addressed Wells again. "Half the town works for Mr. Barrow, directly or indirectly. You take him away, and folks will starve. Their children will go hungry. Is that what you want?" "What I want is justice." Wells replied firmly. "Barrow will get a fair trial. If the town needs leadership, it can elect honest men for a change." "Honest men don't know how to run a mine or negotiate with buyers back east," another rider said. "You're destroying our livelihoods over some Indian lover's crusade." The tension ratcheted higher. Clara could feel Ethan coiled beside her, ready for violence. The judge's men fingered their weapons nervously. Then, unexpectedly, Barrow spoke. "Stand down, Sullivan." His foreman twisted in his saddle. "But Mr. Barrow." "I said stand down. I'll have my day in court." Barrow's smile was unpleasant. After all, trials require evidence, and evidence can be interpreted many ways. The implicit threat chilled Clara more than outright violence would have. Sullivan reluctantly ordered his men to part, allowing the judge's procession to pass, but Clara could feel hostile eyes following them all the way to town. Dust Creek's main street was packed with people as news of Barrow's arrest spread. The crowd was split, some cheering for justice finally served, others muttering darkly about consequences. Clara saw her students in the crowd, Joseph and Sarah standing with their aunt, Tom Henderson beside his father. She tried to smile reassuringly at them, but worry gnawed at her stomach. At the jail, Judge Wells took charge. "Barrow will be held here until transport can be arranged to the territorial capital for trial. I'll be staying in town to ensure nothing unfortunate happens." "You mean like witnesses disappearing?" Ethan asked pointedly. Wells met his gaze steadily. "Exactly like that. Miss Hastings, I'll need you to prepare a formal statement about everything you've discovered. Mr. Cole, the same goes for you regarding your father's death." As they left the jail, Martha Sullivan was waiting, her face creased with worry. "Clara, thank God you're safe. But child, you need to know there's been trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The schoolhouse. Some of Barrow's men." Martha's voice broke. "They burned it. Last night, after you left. Nothing left but ashes and char." Clara felt the blow like a physical punch. All their work, the books she'd bought with her savings, the safe place she'd created for the children gone. "I'm so sorry," Martha continued. "I tried to stop them, but—" "You could have been hurt," Clara interrupted, squeezing the older woman's hands. "It's just a building. We'll rebuild." But even as she said it, exhaustion weighed on her shoulders. How many times could they rebuild? How many battles could they fight? That evening, in Martha's parlor, Clara and Ethan met with Judge Wells to plan their next steps. The judge was a tall, austere man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Barrow's trial will be in 3 weeks, he said. "That gives his lawyers time to prepare a defense, but also gives us time to solidify our case. Miss Hastings, these documents you found, are they the original?" "No," Clara admitted. "I made copies. The originals are hidden." She didn't mention where the less people knew, the safer the documents would be. "Smart. We'll need those originals for trial. In the meantime, I am concerned about witness safety. Barrow still has supporters, and desperate men do desperate things." "I'm not leaving," Clara said firmly. "The children need stability, especially now." "The school is gone," Ethan reminded her gently. "Then I'll teach in the church, or outdoors under the cottonwoods. The building isn't what matters." Judge Wells studied her with something like admiration. "You're a brave woman, Miss Hastings. Foolishly brave, perhaps, but brave nonetheless." He turned to Ethan. "I'm deputizing you temporarily. I need men I can trust, and despite your checkered reputation, I believe you're one of them." Ethan looked surprised. "I'm no lawman, Judge. You're a man who stands for what's right. That's lawman enough for me." Wells pinned a deputy's badge on Ethan's shirt. "Your first job is keeping Miss Hastings alive until trial." The next days passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Clara held classes under the large cottonwood in the town square, her students sitting on borrowed blankets. More children began attending, their parents emboldened by Barrow's arrest. Even some who had been most hostile to her teaching began to soften. But the nights were dangerous. Shots were fired at Martha's boarding house. Dead animals were left on the doorstep with threatening notes. Once, Clara woke to find her room filled with smoke. Someone had set fire to the woodpile outside her window. Ethan barely left her side. sleeping in Martha's parlor with his gun at hand. The strain showed in the deepening lines around his eyes and the way his hand never strayed far from his weapon. "This can't go on," Clara said one evening after another threatening incident. "People are going to get hurt because of me." "People have already been hurt," Ethan replied. "That's why we're doing this. Remember, for your father, for Joseph's grandfather, for all of them." "I know, but—" He silenced her with a kiss. "No buts. We see this through." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sheriff Briggs, stripped of his badge and awaiting his own charges, asked to speak with Clara. She met him in the jail, Ethan at her side. Briggs looked older, diminished, his cold eyes now holding something almost like remorse. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he began without preamble, "but there are things you need to know about that night 5 years ago." Clara leaned forward. "The night your family died?" Briggs nodded, his jaw working. "I always suspected the raid was wrong. My Mary. She'd been teaching some Lakota children, like you do, helping them with English. The warriors who attacked spoke perfect English when they thought no one could hear, and one of them—" He paused, struggling. "One of them had a tattoo. Military. Not something any Lakota would have." "But you blamed them anyway," Ethan said, his voice hard. "I blamed them because it was easier than admitting I'd failed to protect my family. Because Barrow was there the next day, offering sympathy and support and encouraging my hate." Briggs's laugh was bitter. "He played me like a fiddle, gave me purpose, direction, made me his weapon against anyone who might threaten him." "Why tell us now?" Clara asked. "Because I'm tired of being a fool. Because that boy they hanged," his voice cracked, "he was the same age my son would have been. And because I found this." He pulled out a worn piece of paper. "Found it in McCready's things after he died. It's a receipt for services rendered 5 years ago. The date matches." Clara took the paper with trembling hands. It was exactly what they needed, proof that McCready had been paid for the massacre. Signed by Barrow himself. "This will help convict him," Judge Wells said when they showed him the receipt. "But I'm concerned. Barrow's been too quiet. Men like him don't go down without a fight." His concerns proved prophetic. 2 nights before the trial transport was scheduled, Clara woke to the sound of gunfire. The jail was under attack. She and Ethan raced toward the chaos, arriving to find a full battle underway. Sullivan and a dozen men were trying to break Barrow out, while Judge Wells and his deputies fought to stop them. "Stay back!" Ethan shouted, pushing Clara behind a water trough as bullets whined overhead. But Clara had spotted movement in the shadows, men circling around behind the jail. "Where the cells were. They're going around back." Ethan swore and sprinted toward the rear of the building, Clara following despite his shouts to stay put. They arrived just as 2 men were prying at the barred window of Barrow's cell. "Stop right there," Ethan commanded, his gun drawn. The men spun, reaching for their weapons. The firefight was brief but intense. When it ended, one attacker lay dead and the other wounded. But more were coming. "We can't hold them," Ethan said grimly. "There are too many." Then, unexpectedly, help arrived. The townspeople led by Dr. Morrison, Tom Henderson's father, and even some former mine workers had armed themselves and come to defend the jail. "This is our town," Morrison shouted. "We won't let it be ruled by fear anymore." The tide turned quickly after that, outnumbered and outgunned. Sullivan's men retreated into the desert. Sullivan himself was captured, and Barrow's escape attempt had failed. In the aftermath, as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, Judge Wells surveyed the damage. Several men were wounded, but miraculously, no one had died except the one attacker. "This town has backbone after all," he said to Clara. "You started something here. Change." "Change is never easy," Clara replied, leaning against Ethan, exhausted but victorious. The trial transport left that afternoon, Barrow in chains, surrounded by a heavy guard. Clara had given her statement, provided the documents, and done all she could. The rest was up to the territorial court. As the prison wagon disappeared into the distance, Ethan turned to Clara. "It's really over." "This part is," she agreed. "But there's still so much work to do. The school to rebuild, wounds to heal, trust to restore. We don't have to do it alone," a voice said. They turned to find a crowd gathering parents and children, miners and ranchers, even some who had once supported Barrow. "We want to help rebuild the school," Tom's father said, "and not just the building, the whole town. Make it something better." Joseph stepped forward shyly. "Miss Clara, I kept something for you." He held out her teaching books, the ones she'd thought burned. "Sarah and I saved them from the fire. For when you came back." Clara felt tears sting her eyes as she accepted the scorched but intact books. "Thank you," she whispered. As plans began forming around them, timber donations, work crews, fundraising. Ethan drew Clara aside. "So, about California." She smiled up at him. "Ask me again after we've rebuilt the school, after Joseph graduates, after this town becomes what it could be." "That could take years," he pointed out. "Then I guess you're stuck with me for years," she replied, standing on her toes to kiss him. He grinned against her lips. "I think I can live with that." As the sun climbed higher over Dust Creek, casting long shadows across the desert, Clara looked around at the faces surrounding her, no longer hostile strangers, but neighbors, friends, family of choice. The wild teacher who had arrived as a stranger had found her place, her purpose, and her heart. The road ahead would be long and not without challenges. There would be those who resisted change, who mourned the old ways. But there would also be children learning to read, former enemies becoming allies, and a town slowly healing from years of tyranny. And through it all, there would be Ethan, her cowboy, her protector, her love. Together, they would build something new from the ashes of the old. The truth had finally come to light in Dust Creek, and with truth came hope precious and powerful as water in the desert, ready to make even the driest ground bloom. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 6, Unexpected Alliance, asterisk, asterisk. The news arrived on a dust-laden wind at 2 weeks after Barrow's transport left for trial. A lone rider, exhausted and covered in trail dirt, brought word that shook Dust Creek to its foundations. The prison wagon had been attacked. Guards were dead. Barrow and several prisoners had escaped. Clara stood in the half-rebuilt schoolhouse, hammer in hand, as Judge Wells delivered the grim news. Around her, the volunteers who'd been helping with construction fell silent. "How?" Ethan's voice was flat, dangerous. "Professional job." Wells replied, "Military precision. Someone with deep pockets hired the best guns money could buy." He looked older, worn down by this setback. "I'm heading out with a posse at dawn, but Barrow knows this country. He could be anywhere." "He'll come here," Clara said with quiet certainty. "He'll come for revenge. For me, for the documents, for anyone who stood against him." That night, Dust Creek transformed into an armed camp. Men patrolled the streets. Women kept rifles by their doors. Children were kept indoors, their lessons suspended. The fragile hope that had begun to bloom withered in the face of renewed fear. Ethan refused to leave Clara's side, sleeping on the floor of her room with his back against the door. But it was Sheriff Briggs who provided the next surprise. Released on his own recognizance pending trial, he appeared at Martha's boarding house just after midnight. "I need to speak with Miss Hastings," he said, his face haggard. "I know where Barrow might go." They gathered in Martha's kitchen, Clara, Ethan, Judge Wells, and Briggs. The former sheriff spread a worn map on the table. "There's an old Spanish ranch about 30 miles southwest, abandoned for decades, but the wells still have water. Barrow bought it through shell companies years ago. He calls it his insurance policy. If he's planning something big, That's where he'll stage from. Why tell us? Ethan's distrust was palpable. Briggs met his gaze steadily. Because I've been a fool and a coward, but I'm not a child killer. And that's what Barrow's planning. He wants to take the Indian children Joseph, Sarah, the others, use them as leverage to get his empire back. Clara's blood ran cold. How do you know this? Because he tried to recruit me before his trial. Said if things went bad, that would be his play. Hit them where it hurts most, he said. Briggs's jaw clenched. I told him I was done with his schemes, but he just laughed. Said I'd already sold my soul, might as well get full value. Judge Wells studied the map. 30 miles of rough country. If we ride hard, we could be there by dawn. It'll be heavily defended, Ethan warned. Barrow's not stupid. Then we need to be smarter. Clara stood, decision crystallizing. We can't wait for him to come to us. Every moment gives him more time to prepare. You're not going, Ethan said immediately. Those are my students he's threatening. Steel entered Clara's voice. I'm going! The argument was brief but fierce. In the end, practicality won. Clara could shoot. Ethan had made sure of that over the past weeks. And she knew the children better than anyone. Could keep them calm if rescue became necessary. They assembled their force carefully. Judge Wells led. With Ethan as his second, Dr. Morrison insisted on coming, medical bag in hand. Tom Henderson's father brought 3 of his best ranch hands. And surprisingly, several Lakota men appeared, led by Joseph's uncle, Samuel Crow Feather. These are our children too, Samuel said simply when questioned. We stand together or fall apart. Even more unexpected was when Briggs offered his knowledge of Barrow's tactics. I helped plan his defenses once. I know how he thinks. The alliance was uneasy former enemies united by necessity. But as they rode out under cover of darkness, Clara felt something shifting. The artificial divisions Barrow had fostered were crumbling in the face of shared purpose. They stopped 5 miles from the ranch as the eastern sky began to lighten. Samuel's scouts had confirmed Briggs's intelligence the ranch was occupied. Perhaps 20 men. Fortified positions. There's another problem, Samuel reported. They already have prisoners. A wagon arrived yesterday. I couldn't see who, but they were small. Children. Clara's heart clenched. From the reservation. Most likely, Barrow's making his move. Judge Wells gathered the group. We need a diversion, something to draw their attention while a smaller force infiltrates. I have an idea, Briggs said slowly, but you're not going to like it. His plan was audacious. Briggs would approach openly, claiming to have captured Clara and Ethan. While Barrow's men focused on this prize, the others would strike from multiple directions. It's suicide, Ethan said flatly. The moment Barrow realizes it's a trick, then we'd better make it convincing. Briggs pulled out a set of shackles. These should help. Clara saw the logic, even as her instincts screamed against it. It could work. Barrow's ego is his weakness. He'd want to see us brought in chains. The preparation was tense. Clara and Ethan allowed themselves to be shackled, though Ethan kept a hidden key. Briggs would drive the wagon, playing the part of bounty hunter. Meanwhile, the others would position themselves around the ranch. If this goes wrong, Ethan began as the shackles clicked shut. It won't, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. It can't. The sun was fully up as their wagon approached the ranch. Clara could see armed men on the walls, rifles trained on them. Her heart hammered, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. That's close enough, a voice called out. State your business. Tell Barrow I've brought him a gift. Briggs shouted back. The schoolmarm and her cowboy lover. Figured he'd pay better than the law. Minutes stretched like hours. Then the gates opened, and Lucian Barrow himself emerged, flanked by gunmen. He looked rougher than before prison had left its mark, but his eyes still held that cold intelligence. Well, Sheriff Briggs, I heard you'd lost your nerve. Barrow approached the wagon, satisfaction written across his face. But money talks louder than conscience, doesn't it? You said you'd pay well for them, Briggs replied, playing his part. I need funds to leave the territory. Too many people want me dead. Barrow circled the wagon, examining his prisoners. When he reached Clara, he gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. The troublesome teacher, you cost me everything. His grip tightened painfully. But don't worry, you'll live long enough to watch me reclaim it all. Starting with those brats you're so fond of. If you hurt those children, Clara began. Barrow backhanded her, splitting her lip. Ethan surged against his chains with a snarl, but the shackles held. Feisty still. Good. Breaking you will be all the sweeter. Barrow turned to his men. Take them to the cellar. We'll deal with them after. The first shot rang out, taking down one of Barrow's sentries. Then chaos erupted from all directions. Judge Wells and his men stormed the front gate. The Lakota warriors struck from the sides. Ranch hands poured over the back walls. Briggs moved with surprising speed, drawing a hidden gun and putting himself between Barrow and the wagon. Surprise, he said grimly. Ethan had his shackles off in seconds, freeing Clara and tossing her a pistol Briggs had concealed under the wagon seat. They dove for cover as bullets filled the air. The battle was fierce but brief. Barrow's men, caught off guard and outnumbered, began surrendering or fleeing. Barrow himself retreated toward the main house, shooting wildly. "The children!" Clara shouted over the gunfire. "They must be in the house!" She and Ethan fought their way across the courtyard. Samuel Crowfeather and his warriors had already breached the rear entrance. Inside, they could hear children crying. They found them locked in the root cellar, 8 Lakota children, terrified but unharmed. Joseph was among them, trying to comfort the younger ones despite his own fear. "Miss Clara," he threw himself into her arms. "I knew you'd come." "Get them out," Ethan ordered. "I'll find Barrow." But Clara wasn't leaving him. They cleared the children, Samuel's men spiriting them to safety, then pressed deeper into the house. They found Barrow in his study, frantically stuffing papers into a fire. Evidence, Clara realized. He was destroying evidence. "It's over, Barrow," Ethan said. "Gun steady." Barrow laughed, a wild sound. "Over, I still have friends, powerful friends. This is just a setback." He pulled out a Derringer, the small gun aimed at Clara. "But I'll have satisfaction first." Several things happened at once. Ethan moved to shield Clara, Barrow fired, and Briggs appeared in the doorway, his sheriff's pistol booming. Barrow crumpled, the Derringer falling from nerveless fingers. Briggs's shot had found its mark. "Now it's over," Briggs said quietly. Ethan was bleeding from a graze where Barrow's bullet had caught his shoulder, but he was alive. Clara pressed against him, relief making her knees weak. The aftermath was swift. Barrow died within minutes, taking his secrets to the grave. His remaining men surrendered or scattered. The kidnapped children were reunited with their families, traumatized but whole. As they prepared to return to Dust Creek, Briggs approached Clara and Ethan. The former sheriff looked older, worn, but somehow cleaner. "I know I can't undo what I've done," he said. "The hate I spread, the people I hurt, but maybe I can start making amends." "What will you do?" Clara asked. "Face my trial, serve my time, then, I don't know, try to be better, I suppose." He offered his hand to Ethan. "Your father would be proud. You're the man I should have been." Ethan hesitated, then shook the offered hand. "We all have ghosts, Briggs. What matters is what we do next." The ride back to Dust Creek was subdued despite their victory. Barrow was gone, but the scars he'd left would take time to heal. Still, as they crested the last ridge and saw the town spread below them, Clara felt hope stirring. "Look," Joseph said from his place riding with Samuel. "They're building—" He was right. The schoolhouse construction had continued in their absence. People were working together, White and Lakota. Former enemies now united in common purpose. Judge Wells rode up beside Clara and Ethan. "You two have done something remarkable here. This town will never be the same." "That was the idea," Clara said, leaning into Ethan's uninjured side. "What's next for you? I could use deputies like you in other troubled towns." Clara and Ethan exchanged glances. "Thanks, Judge," Ethan said, "but I think we'll stick around here for a while. See this through." "Besides," Clara added with a smile, "I have a classroom full of students waiting. Can't disappoint them." As they rode into town, people emerged from buildings, cheering their return. The children who'd been rescued were embraced by tearful relatives. Former Barrow supporters stood awkwardly aside, unsure of their place in this new order. Clara saw it all, the joy, the uncertainty, the tentative hope. There was so much work ahead. Trust to rebuild, wounds to heal, a community to forge from the fragments of the old. But standing in the dusty street, surrounded by her students and neighbors, with Ethan's hand warm in hers, Clara felt ready for the challenge. The wild teacher had started as a stranger in town, desired by all but belonging to none. Now she was part of something larger, a town reborn. A future being written one lesson at a time. "Home," Ethan murmured, echoing her thoughts. "Home," she agreed, and turned to face whatever came next, knowing they would face it together. The unexpected alliance forged in crisis had become something more, a foundation for the future. And on that foundation, Dust Creek would build something new, something better, something worthy of the sacrifices made to achieve it. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 7. Judgment Under Western Skies, asterisk, asterisk. The rebuilt schoolhouse stood proudly in the morning light, its fresh pine boards golden in the sun. Clara ran her hand along the smooth wood of the doorframe, marveling at how the community had come together. In just 3 weeks since Barrow's death, the building had risen from ashes like a phoenix, larger, stronger, and more welcoming than before. "Ready for the grand opening?" Ethan asked, approaching with a bouquet of desert wildflowers he'd gathered at dawn. Clara accepted them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "As ready as one can be when half the territorial government is attending." The reopening had attracted attention from far beyond Dust Creek. Judge Wells had ensured that newspapers carried the story, a town that had thrown off the yoke of corruption, where former enemies now worked side by side. Politicians, eager to associate themselves with such a hopeful narrative, had announced their attendance. "They're not here for the school," Clara said quietly. "They're here to make speeches about progress while avoiding the hard work of change." "Then we give them something real to see," Ethan replied, pulling her close. "Show them what actual progress looks like." The morning brought wagons and riders from across the territory. Clara watched from the schoolhouse window as important men in city suits mingled awkwardly with the townspeople. She spotted several who had likely taken Barrow's bribes in the past, now eager to distance themselves from his memory. "Miss Clara?" Joseph burst through the door, eyes bright with excitement. "There's a photographer. He wants to take a picture of all the students together." "Then we'd better look our best," Clara said, smoothing his unruly hair. "Go gather everyone. And Joseph, make sure everyone stands together. No separation by race. We are one school." As the children assembled, Clara noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. Former Sheriff Briggs stood apart, wearing civilian clothes that seemed to hang awkwardly on his frame. Their eyes met, and he touched his hat brim before turning away. The photographer, a thin man with an enormous camera apparatus, fussed over positioning. The white children in front, Indians in back. All mixed together. Clara interrupted firmly, "Or no photograph at all." The man sputtered. "But Judge Wells, overhearing, backed her up. "You heard the lady. This is the new Dust Creek. We stand as equals or not at all." The resulting photograph would become famous children of all backgrounds linked arm in arm. Clara in the center with Ethan behind her, his hand protective on her shoulder. It captured a moment of hope that would inspire other communities across the territory. The speeches began at noon. Politicians pontificated about progress and unity while carefully avoiding any mention of their past complicity. Clara stood with the townspeople, biting her tongue as revisionist history was written before her eyes. Then, something unexpected happened. Samuel Crowfeather stepped forward during a lull in the speeches. "I would speak," he said simply. The politicians exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't in their script, but Judge Wells gestured him forward. Samuel's voice carried clearly across the square. "You talk of unity as if it's new. My people have stories of harmony from before the Troubles. We remember when different peoples traded fairly, when children played together without fear. What you call progress, we call returning to wisdom temporarily forgotten." He looked directly at the assembled dignitaries. "The question is not whether we can work together. We've proven that. The question is whether you will allow it, or if you'll create new barrows to divide us for profit." The silence was deafening. Then, from the crowd, applause started first from the townspeople, then spreading reluctantly to the visitors. The afternoon brought the moment Clara had dreaded. A territorial prosecutor had come to interview witnesses for the upcoming trials. Several of Barrow's men had been captured and would face justice, but the prosecutor seemed more interested in minimizing scandal than pursuing truth. "Miss Hastings," he said in her makeshift office, "your testimony could be problematic. A young woman, unmarried, living alone, making accusations against respectable businessmen." "Dead businessmen," Ethan interjected from the doorway. "Barrow is beyond earthly justice. But his associates aren't, and they have powerful friends." The prosecutor leaned forward. "Perhaps we could modify your statement. Focus on the immediate crimes. Leave out the broader implications." "You want me to lie?" Clara said flatly. "I want you to be strategic. Think of your future here, your school, your relationship." His eyes flicked meaningfully between Clara and Ethan. Small towns can be unforgiving of scandal. Clara stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Get out!" "Miss Hastings, get out of my school. If you want to bury the truth to protect the powerful, you'll do it without my help." After he left, Ethan found Clara at her desk, head in her hands. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "Did I? He's right about the town, about us. People are already talking about how much time we spend together." "Let them talk." Ethan knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Clara, I've been thinking about California, about the future, about us." Her heart began to race. "Ethan, marry me." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Not someday? Not after things settle down? Now? Today? Make an honest man of me and silence the gossips in one stroke." Clara stared at him, mouth open. That's your proposal to spite the gossips?" "No," he groaned, running a hand through his hair. "I'm doing this all wrong. Clara Hastings, you turned my world upside down from the moment you kicked that knife away from Garrett. You made me believe in justice again, in hope, in a future worth fighting for. I love your courage, your stubbornness, your terrible aim with a rifle." "My aim is improving," she protested, laughing despite herself. "Marry me because I can't imagine a day without you, because you're my partner in everything that matters, because I want to build a life with you, here or anywhere else you choose." Clara cupped his face in her hands, seeing the vulnerability beneath his usual stoicism. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, pouring months of fear and hope and love into the embrace. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "When?" Clara asked. "There's a preacher here for the ceremony, Reverend Morrison, Lucy's uncle. I may have already asked him to stand by." "Ethan Cole." Clara laughed. "Were you that confident I'd say yes?" "Hopeful," he corrected. "Desperately hopeful." The wedding took place at sunset. In the schoolhouse Clara had fought so hard to build. Word spread quickly, and the space filled with townspeople. Martha Sullivan stood as witness, tears streaming down her face. Joseph and Sarah scattered desert flowers. Even some of the visiting dignitaries stayed, drawn by the simple beauty of the moment. Clara wore her best dress, still simple by Eastern standards, but clean and pressed. Ethan had somehow procured a new shirt and had even attempted to tame his perpetually unruly hair. They stood before Reverend Morrison, hands clasped, as he spoke words of commitment and hope. "Do you, Clara, take this man?" "I do," she said before he could finish, earning chuckles from the crowd. "Let him finish, dear," Martha Stage whispered. "It's only proper." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When Reverend Morrison pronounced them married, the cheer that went up could be heard across Dust Creek. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the town had seen. Tables were dragged into the street. Musicians appeared with fiddles and guitars. Food materialized from every household, a true community feast. Clara found herself swept into dance after dance. Ethan's arms steady around her as they moved to the music, around them. The artificial barriers that had divided the town continued to crumble. Lakota and White, miner and rancher, all celebrating together. "No regrets?" Ethan asked as they took a break. Watching Joseph teach the younger children a traditional dance. "Only that we didn't do this sooner," Clara replied, leaning into his warmth. The prosecutor found them there, his formal suit incongruous among the celebrating townspeople. "Mrs. Cole," he said, emphasizing her new name. "I owe you an apology. I've been watching today, seeing what you've built here. Perhaps the full truth does need to be told." "It does," Clara said firmly. "All of it." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll need those original documents. And your complete testimony. The trials won't be easy. Barrow had friends in high places." "We've faced worse," Ethan said, his arm tightening around Clara. As the evening wore on, Clara noticed Briggs sitting alone at the edge of the celebration. She excused herself from Ethan and approached him. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting beside him. "Wasn't sure I'd be welcome," he admitted. "After everything. You helped save those children. You stood against Barrow when it mattered. That counts for something." Briggs was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about what's next, after my trial. After I've paid for what I've done. Samuel Crowfeather says his people believe in redemption through action, not just words." "What kind of action?" "Teaching, maybe. Not like you, I don't have that gift. But teaching young lawmen that justice isn't about who pays you. It's about protecting everyone equally." He managed a rueful smile. "Think anyone would listen to a failed sheriff?" "I think the best teachers are those who've learned from their mistakes," Clara said gently. "And you've certainly done that." The stars were brilliant overhead when the celebration finally began to wind down. Clara and Ethan made their farewells, accepting congratulations and good wishes from people who, just months ago, had viewed her with suspicion and hostility. As they walked toward Martha's boarding house, their temporary home until they could build something of their own, Clara paused to look back at the schoolhouse. Tomorrow, it would be filled with children again. The next day would bring new challenges. The trials, the slow work of building a truly just community. But tonight, she was simply Clara Cole, teacher and wife, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and the town she'd helped transform. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, reading her contemplative mood. "About how far we've come, about how far we still have to go." She turned to face him. about how glad I am that we'll be traveling that road together." He kissed her under the vast western sky, and, for a moment, all was right with the world. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, justice had been served. Love had triumphed, and hope burned bright as the stars above. The wild teacher was a stranger no more. She was home. Asterisk, asterisk, part 10. Dawn of Hope, asterisk, asterisk. 5 years had passed since that tumultuous spring when Clara Hastings first arrived in Dust Creek. The morning sun painted the expanded schoolhouse in warm gold as Clara Cole stood at her classroom window, watching students arrive for another day of lessons. The building now boasted 3 rooms, a small library, and even a laboratory for science experiments funded by the successful silver mine now run as a cooperative by its workers. "Mama, James won't give me back my slate," a small voice piped up behind her. Clara turned to see her daughter, 3-year-old Margaret, glaring at her older brother with all the righteous indignation a toddler could muster. James, nearly 5, held the slate high above his sister's reach with a mischievous grin that was pure Ethan. "James Samuel Cole," Clara said, using his full name, the middle name honoring Samuel Crowfeather, who had become like family. "Give your sister back her slate." "But she drew a horse that looks like a potato," James protested, even as he handed it over. "All art starts somewhere," Clara said, ruffling his sandy hair. "Remember when you couldn't write your letters?" The schoolhouse began filling with students 28 now, from all backgrounds. Joseph, now 17 and Clara's assistant teacher, helped the younger children with their coats. His sister Sarah had left for college back east the previous year, one of the first from Dust Creek to do so. "Mrs. Cole," Joseph said, "the new family, the Washingtons, they're here. Should I show them around?" Clara smiled at the young man. Joseph had become confident, educated, bridging 2 worlds with grace. "Please do. Make them feel welcome." As the morning lessons began, Clara moved between groups with practiced ease. The older students worked on algebra while she helped the younger ones with reading. The walls were covered with maps, drawings, and a beautiful quilt made by the Mothers Group showing the history of Dust Creek, including its darker chapters, because Clara believed in teaching truth, not comfortable lies. At recess, Ethan appeared with lunch, as he did most days. He'd taken over as sheriff 2 years prior, after the town council had begged him to bring his integrity to the position. The badge sat easily on him now, representing protection rather than oppression. "Any trouble?" Clara asked as they sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching the children play. James and Margaret had joined the games, their laughter mixing with the others. "Nothing major. Helped the Hendersons round up some stray cattle. Mediated a dispute over water rights." He paused, studying her face. "But that's not what you're really asking about, is it?" Clara sighed. They'd received word the previous week that several of Barrow's former associates had been released from prison, their sentences commuted by a judge who'd suddenly come into wealth. "I can't help but worry," she admitted. "We've built something good here. The thought of it being threatened again." "Hey," Ethan took her hand, his calloused thumb rubbing soothing circles. "We're not the same people we were 5 years ago. Neither is this town. If trouble comes, we'll face it together. All of us." As if to prove his point, riders appeared on the horizon, not threats, but familiar faces. Judge Wells, now a territorial Supreme Court justice, led the group. With him rode several other figures Clara recognized from the trials. "Justice Wells." Clara greeted him as the students excitedly gathered around the horses. "What brings you to Dust Creek?" "Good news, for once." Wells dismounted, his smile genuine. "The territorial legislature has passed the Education Equity Act, based largely on what you've accomplished here. Equal funding for all children, regardless of race, integration encouraged, not forbidden." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Truly." "Truly. And there's more." He pulled out an official-looking document. They're establishing a normal school for teacher training in the capital. They want you to help design the curriculum, maybe teach there during summers. Show others how to do what you've done here. Before Clara could respond, another rider approached this one unexpected. Sheriff Briggs, aged but walking tall, wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge. Briggs, Ethan stood, hand instinctively moving toward his gun before relaxing. "Marshal Briggs now," the older man said. "Funny how life works out. After my trial, after serving my time, I did what I promised. Taught young lawmen about justice, real justice. Turns out, the federal government was listening." He looked at Clara. "I'm here about those released prisoners. They won't be troubling you. They've been convinced to seek opportunities elsewhere, far elsewhere." "You threatened them?" Clara asked. "Didn't have to. Just explained that Dust Creek was under federal protection now. A model community. They're calling it, any interference would be dealt with at the highest levels." His weathered face cracked a rare smile. "Seems your revolution succeeded. Mrs. Cole." The afternoon brought a celebration. Word spread quickly, and soon the schoolyard filled with townspeople. The success of one had become the success of all. Clara watched as former enemies shared food and stories, as children of all backgrounds played together without thought of difference. Martha Sullivan, grayer now but still spry, pulled Clara aside. "Your parents would be so proud," she said softly. "You didn't just teach lessons. You taught a whole town how to be better." "We taught each other," Clara corrected, watching as Ethan lifted Margaret onto his shoulders while James demonstrated a rope trick he'd learned from the ranch hands. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold, Clara found herself standing where the old hanging tree had been. It had been cut down 3 years ago, replaced by a small garden where all the children helped tend vegetables for families in need. Joseph joined her, now taller than she was. "Miss Clara, sorry. Mrs. Cole, do you ever think about leaving? You could teach anywhere now. Big cities, universities." Clara considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what that would be like. But then I look around, and I see James playing with the Henderson boys. Margaret learning Lakota words from your cousin. Your success. All we've built. How could I leave this?" "Even for California?" Joseph asked with a knowing smile. Clara laughed. "Ethan's given up on California. He says the sunset's prettier here anyway," as if summoned by his name. Ethan appeared with their children. Margaret was half asleep against his shoulder, while James chattered about the day's adventures. "Ready to head home?" Ethan asked. Home. Their real home now, built with their own hands on the edge of town, with a view of the schoolhouse and the endless desert beyond, a place where anyone was welcome at their table, where the children grew up knowing love and acceptance as natural as breathing. "Almost," Clara said. "Let me just close up the schoolhouse." Inside, she walked through the quiet rooms, straightening desks, picking up forgotten slates. On her desk sat the photograph from 5 years ago, all the children together, defying convention. Many of those faces had moved on now, pursuing dreams that once seemed impossible. But new faces had taken their places, the legacy continuing. She stopped at the dedication plaque by the door, donated by the town council. And Dust Creek School, where all children learn as equals. Dedicated to Clara Cole, who taught us that education is not just about books, but about building a better world. Asterisk. Mama James appeared in the doorway. "Papa says to tell you Margaret's asking for a story, the one about the wild teacher." Clara smiled, locking the schoolhouse door. "That's her favorite, though I think we need a new ending now." "Why?" James asked, taking her hand as they walked toward their waiting family. "Because the wild teacher isn't wild anymore. She's not a stranger. She's home." They walked together through the peaceful streets of Dust Creek, past the cooperative mine, past the integrated businesses, past the church where all were welcome. The town wasn't perfect, no place ever was. But it was good, and getting better each day. That night, as Clara tucked her children into bed and told them the story they loved, edited for young ears, she reflected on the journey. The frightened but determined young woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach would hardly recognize herself now. But the core remained the same, the belief that education could change lives, that courage could overcome prejudice, that love could conquer fear. "And the teacher and the cowboy?" Margaret asked sleepily, as she always did. "They lived happily ever after," Clara said, kissing her forehead, "building their life one day at a time." "That's a good ending," James decided. "But I like the part with the gunfight better." Clara laughed softly, moving to her son's bed. "Someday you'll understand that the real victories aren't won with guns, but with patience and persistence and people choosing to be better." Later, sitting on their porch with Ethan, watching the stars wheel overhead, Clara felt a deep contentment. The wild teacher who'd been desired by all had found something better than admiration. She'd found purpose, community, and a love that had weathered every storm. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. "None," Clara said, leaning into his warmth. "Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd kicked that knife toward Garrett instead of away." Ethan laughed, the sound rich in the desert night. "Then I'd have had to find another way to get your attention, and knowing me, it would have been much less impressive." "Impossible," Clara said. "You had my attention from that first moment. A woman knows when she's met her match." "Your match, I prefer to think of us as partners." "Partners," Clara agreed, taking his hand. "In everything that matters." The coyotes sang their ancient song in the distance, and the desert wind whispered through the sage. But here, in this small corner of the vast frontier, peace reigned. The dawn of hope had become the full light of day, and in that light, anything seemed possible. The wild teacher was a stranger in town no more. She was Clara Cole-wife, mother, teacher, and architect of change. Her love story with Ethan was just one thread in the tapestry she'd helped weave. But it was the golden thread that held all the others together. In choosing each other, they'd chosen hope. In building their life together, they'd helped build a better world. And that, Clara thought as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, was the greatest lesson of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and Ethan's journey. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Night, like this video. And don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these heartfelt frontier tales. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive.